Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today. We're going to go for about 35 to 40 minutes of speaking, followed by 20 to 25 minutes of questions. Purushottama, are you ready to take it away?
Yes, ready.
All right, go for
it. Okay. Right. So you can see the slides. I think I'm not quite sure why I'm not coming on the video.
I can see the slides.
Yeah, and but the video, no. Okay, you can see the slides. So that's great, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be asked to present this lecture. So the topic is exploring Panpsychism and Panantheism in Jain philosophy of religion. Gregory Miller perspicuously reports Panpsychism is the view that there's some, I'm not quite sure what the background sound is, but it may be that people haven't muted themselves. Okay. So Panpsychism is the view that, quote, all things have a mind or a mind-like nature, end quote. In the contemporary literature, all has been taken to denote fundamental microphysical objects. And secondly, correctly structured macrophysical objects, namely the properly functioning brains of animals, mostly, and at the peak, human beings. Mind or mind-like has been taken to refer to phenomenal consciousness, the what's-it-likeness of consciousness, a la Nagel. The panpsychist operates with the assumption of priority atomism. The fundamental entities are the microphysical parts of the cosmos. This is the bottom-up model. However, panpsychism has described, as described here, runs into what is called the combination problem. How can subjects and the experiences be composed of other subjects and their experiences? How can there be such likeness between and among minds, phenomenologically speaking, each having traces of consciousness, but which don't manifest an extra common ground or frame that might combine them together? They seem so disparate, almost like mirror images, but each mind is as real and with willy-nilly all the properties of the other minds have. So give you an analogy, here are 5 quarters. Each has the value of 25 cents in US currency. Put together is a combination, they form, in combination they form a dollar. In fact, because there is a dollar value in the US Treasury that guarantees the sum of the quarters, that each is able to have the value of 25 cents. Otherwise, it's a mere ruble. Did I say ruble? What is a ruble, not ruble, which may be true too. Sorry, I meant a smooth bit of metal. Okay.
Sorry, подходи.
I beg your pardon?
Ну, час где-то.
Faced with this difficulty, many panpsychists are turning to alternatives. The main alternative to atomistic panpsychism is a view that has been recently labeled cosmopsychism. This is the top-down model. This view follows the panpsychist creed that all things have a mind, but instead contemporary cosmopsychists take all to refer to the fundamental physical cosmos as a whole and to correctly structured macrophysical objects, that is, properly functioning brains. The difference between panpsychism and cosmopsychism is simply a difference in what it is they consider to be the fundamental entities of the universe. In direct contrast to micro-panpsychists, which is what I think we should call them. We should not call them panpsychists because there are other nuances to panpsychism as well. So anyway, the micro-panpsychists, the bottom-up crowd, in contrast to them, the cosmopsychists, the top-down, operates with the assumption of priority monism. The fundamental entity is the whole cosmos itself, Sheffer. Cosmopsychists have the opposite problem, called the decombination problem. How can a subject and its experience decompose into other subjects and their experiences? If the world is one, then why is it so heterogeneous in nature? So that is, if there is a unitary whole, how do so many individual pieces appear and manifest the same property possessed by the whole? Of course, we could use the hologram model, but it doesn't matter whether the priority monism the cosmopsychists subscribe to is conceived in terms of matter, that is a grand physical superentity, hence the natural cosmos, or in spiritual terms as a transcendental-like entity, God, Brahman, Dreamtime, Rainbow Serpent, Spirit, and so forth, the decombination problem remains. The Hindu cosmogony proposes that the world is produced from an original unitary being by an autonomous process of successive emanation or division. Such cosmogonies are found already in the oldest corpus of Sanskrit texts, the hymns of Rig Veda, for example, variously attributing to a primordial being. That one, Tadekam, the great Purusha dismembered, or the world born from the cracking open of an egg, or the spill of an ineffable semen by Prajapati, or the multiplication of single element like heat or water or space. And further divisions into 3, 5, 333,000, etc. accounts for the heterogeneity.
Hey, Purushottama, 1 second. Your slide is stuck on the very first slide. So if you meant to move your slides forward, you might want to click forward.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. I have it noted where I moved the slides.
Oh, okay, no problem. Sorry. And please, everyone else, please mute yourself.
Okay. So this was there a little later. Sorry. There was also a later version of Panpsychism in the 19th century, dating back to people like Schopenhauer, who reflects certain holistic views prevalent in classical Indian philosophy, such as Advaita Vedanta, Kashmir Saivism, Shakta theology, and Yogacara strain of Buddhist idealism, which holds that all things have a mind or phenomenal consciousness by dint of being a part of a larger unitary whole or cosmos or absolute consciousness. Capital C, such as Chit, Sabda, Brahman, Chitta, Shiva, even Shakti. The Advaita philosophers argued for a tripartite division of one unitary consciousness, suggesting that the mind extends outside of the bounds in the body because the same unity of consciousness undergirds both the noetic and the objective relative in the perceptual act, in the act of perception. Brahmanic epistemology also has a way of demonstrating the unitary nature of consciousness having tripartite division. And here is a quote from a very famous text, Vedanta Paribhasha. And this is from a work that Anand Vaidya and I did on extended mind. So the luminous mind issuing through the medium of, so I need to get this dark bits out. So the medium of eyes goes to the space occupied by objects such as a jar and is modified into a form of a jar or any other object. That very modification is called a state, vritti, and so on. So the last part is important. The jar, the mental state, and the form of the jar being in contact with it, the consciousness limited by mental state is not different from the consciousness limited by the jar. And hence, in the knowledge of the jar, there's perception so far as the jar is concerned. So it's the same consciousness that is limited both by the object and by the perceiver, and the perception itself, the cognitive object. So all Hindu non-dualist schools, from Advaita of Shankara, Abhinavagupta, and others that I've mentioned, including right up to modern Vedanta protagonists like K.C. Bhattacharya, who too hatched a theory of absolute consciousness within the sparkle, as it were, of what appears as individual self, bubble thrown up by splashing waves, have this unstinted commitment, albeit with some significant modification achieved in Ramanuja, the 12th century Vedantin, billed as a qualified dualist, who attempted a quasi-dependent relation between cosmopsychism and macropsychism. That's the sort of more or less the next slide. That is more like the persistent Hegelian identity and difference relation between the macropsyche and the absolute. So that line, the horizontal line, is it? No, the vertical line represents the macropsyche, and the inner circle is the body of the individual, and then the outer circle is the absolute. In truth, Ramanuja proposed a more involved and implicative idea of the identity and difference of Brahman and the world as the body of God. So I should say that I correct myself. The inner circle is the body of God, which is the world that we live in. The vertical is as the individual. The other half moon is the other macro the space occupied by other sentient beings. And the outer circle is the circle of Ishvara, or God. So although Ishvara is the universal soul, within him there are individuated and distinct souls, and these souls are as beginningless as Ishvara himself. In their distinctive mark, namely Satchidananda, being, consciousness, and bliss, the souls are in non-different relation to the universal soul. But in their conditioned existence, that's the half-moon line, in respect of the body, complex mind, and so on, they're in a relation of difference, but only to Ishvara qua soul, not Ishvara qua the body, right? Because they're actually one with Ishvara's body. That's all there is, the Ishvara's body. That is to say, the individual as a body and so on is part and parcel of God's body, and yet limited by a soul. Neither are essentially different from the greater soul. The category of minimal differentiation is invoked by Ramanuja to explain the relation between one individual mind and another individual person and another, both generically, that is from the panentheistic position, if you allow me to coin that term. So I'm combining, and I'll do more of that in the next part, explain. So they're not separate. That's the point. Each individual is combined with the other individual by dint of the common soul they share, which is the soul of Ishvara, of God. But they are different because their bodies are different. But again, the bodies are one in Ishvara himself. But there is a minimal differentiation rather than a maximal differentiation here. Okay, so as Hutt or Overzee notes, Ramanuja goes on to explain that the goal of each seeker is precisely to distinguish the body world from the self Brahman and to realize the self's proper form, which is in itself Brahman, knowledge or consciousness. So Ramanuja's panentheism poses a more complex relationship between the divine and the world, between the mind divine and the mind individual. According to this view of panentheism, the divine pervades the world, divine is in the world, and at the same time, the divine sustains the world is in the divine. That's probably the way to put it. The world is in the divine. This allows that the divine be greater than, transcend of, and yet not fully independent of the world. It's a symbiotic relationship. So to sum up this part, cosmopsychism can be understood as the thesis that consciousness at the fundamental level has a holistic unified field metaphysics. Local instances of consciousness are limited aspects of the single field rather than combination out of small elements. Consciousness isn't built up, rather it is limited down. So it's a little like a magnet. If you see the field around the magnet is its real essence. But the iron filings that are attracted to them tend to create a limit on the field, but only in an apparent sense. The limit is actually that of the filing, not of the field itself. So the combination problem isn't a problem for a cosmopsychist style of metaphysics. Advaita Vedanta metaphysics is not microphysicist, it is cosmopsychist. A version of panpsychism that I will build my case on is the following, from Vaidya and Bilimoria. Panpsychism. Consciousness is basic and an intrinsic feature of the universe. It is neither fundamentally physical nor an emergent property of something that is physical. Rather, at the fundamental level, consciousness is present everywhere. Now, I'd like to break out the last statement, despite myself, that consciousness is everywhere, because I wish to come to this question of location a little later. But here I modify the second part and argue, following the Jains, the Jain tradition, that there is an emergence, but it is of a more complex nature and does involve the physical as a limit condition in a supervenient rather than a dependent relation. So I shall explain after I have presented the microsentient picture as we move towards the macrosentient. But before that, a word or two on physicalism, as this is the dominant view that reduces, albeit with certain variations and qualifications, consciousness to brain states, identity thesis, or atomistic monism, or it eliminates the idea of consciousness altogether, even in the modest functionalist sense, as in property dualism via the church lens. On physicalism, as Bernardo Kastrup, among others, have argued, physicalism is explanatorily weak, meaning it doesn't make sense of the observations that we have. According to mainstream physicalism, not only is the world made up of substance, matter, or physically outside and independent of consciousness, but particular arrangements of that substance, such as living brains, also somehow generate consciousness, or at least an illusion of consciousness, as if such an idea were coherent at all. Physically start taking the descriptions for the thing described, the map for the territory, end quote. However, in theoretical physics, I need to go to the next, right. In theoretical physics and quantum mechanics, apart from certain quirky quantum weirdness, such as quantum spin liquid or dancing strings, disappearing quarks, etc., subatomic particles behave in the most odd ways. In supersymmetric string theory, it is said that quantum mechanical particles can disappear by transforming into open strings, messenger particles like photon. They reappear by transforming back into closed loop strings, fermion particles like electron. Now, in thinking in those terms, combine that thesis and antithesis with a synthesis involving the deep physical quiddity found in multiple dimensions, matter and small, found in multiple dimensions, end quote. Matter and smatter, as in quantum physics, and particles and sparticles, as particles, combined with Gregory Hill's infinite quantum radiant materialistic n-bodies, makes for quantum particles and sparticles in bulk disappearing into transparent dimensions below the threshold limits of our 4 dimensions, and then reappearing back into our observable dimensions. These are hidden dimensions discussed by Einstein, Rosen, and Pulaski. So this was from Castro as well. This is from Merding, by the way. So in the realm of consciousness, physicalists will maintain that experiential qualities, which philosophers technically call qualia, are somehow generated by the particular structure and function of biological nervous system, even though these nervous systems, by the physicalist's own account, are entirely incommensurable with the qualities. The result is what is today called the heart problem of consciousness. So there is nothing about physical parameters, that is quantities, in terms of which one could deduce the qualities of experience. Is this really a problem to be solved, or merely a glaring internal contradiction of sopomorphic reasoning? Is the fact that one fails to pull the territory out of a map a problem to be solved by future improved versions of the map and the processes of pulling, as Jack Smart argued it would, or does it merely show that the very attempt is flawed and one needs to revise one's way of thinking about maps and territories? So models are taken to be actual state of affairs. Taking all of the above considerations in mind, the question arises, is it possible for an element of the mind to be constituted by something that is external to the brain-mind, to the brain-body boundary? That is, perhaps the mentalese is neither particular to an organism's internal structure alone, nor the kind of material it is made out of, for example, biological matter. And yet, I would add, the biological structure in a modular form is capable of presenting evidence of sentience from the very minuscule 2-cell molecular structure, say of the amoeba, through the more complex and subtle microbial configurations of multi-celled creepers and crawlers of jellyfish and reptiles and cephalopods, right up to the larger brain-endowed quadrupeds, bipeds, sapiens, etc. And this is where the Jain philosophy will come in a moment, but a little bit on the evidence that comes from biology rather than physics. So from now we know from biology that molecules are, of course, not the smallest coulomb. Biology is showing us something different. Biology shows that we are composed of living shells, and experience reveals that a living person is more than the sum of his or her cellular parts. As Levin and Eustier put it, describing the all-abounding science of intelligence, the ability to reach a particular goal or solve a problem by undertaking new steps in the face of changing circumstances is quite glaring. It's amazing. It's evident not just in intelligent people and mammals and birds and so forth, but also cells and tissues, individual neurons and network of neurons, viruses, We saw that with the viruses that we just had from corona. Ribosomes and RNA fragments down to motor proteins and molecular networks. Across all these scales, living things solve problems and achieve goals by flexibly navigating different spaces, metabolic, physiological, genetic, cognitive, behavioral. And contrary to Darwinian evolutionary view of random mutation, Levin and Eustace argue that, quote, intelligence is not something that happened at the tail end of evolution, but was discovered towards the beginning, long before brains came on the scene. So it's sort of not necessarily reducing, or not saying that, intelligence is absolutely some other substance outside of the universe, but the problem remains that the intelligence in principle seems to be prior to substances. Single cells, further on, they say, can process local information about their environment and their own states to pursue tiny cell-level goals, such as staying pointed to a specific direction. But networks of cells can integrate signals from across distance, store memories of patterns, and compute the outcomes of large-scale questions. Yeah, whales and dolphins are known to do that, and monkeys could work out, chimpanzees and so forth, that is this finger the right length? Does this face look right, etc. Cell networks carry out computations that can assess larger quantities, such as anatomical shape. That's how recognition happens in animals, and direct the underlying cell activity to bring the system closer to a specified goal, such as called a set point. A tiny worm with just 300 brain cells has shocked scientists with his ability to make complex decisions. These invertebrate Einsteins display a range of different smart behaviors that vary with the situation, despite having sparse neuron power. The noggins are equipped with around 285 million times fewer neurons than humans, who can have around 86 billion of these nerve cells, and yet they exude immense intelligence. So as for explanation, the author suggests achieving such intelligence, finely tuned calibration, likely relies on modularity, the first step that we believe can explain the emergence of intelligent behavior. Now, it doesn't say very much more than another way of saying this is a map. It's not a territory. We actually don't know, but we may get there one day. This is slide 5. Okay, so of course there is no suggestion in this and such biologically inspired accounts that there is, like the Jains would call jiva, life monads, a hovering, self-expansive consciousness that provides the basic bedrock motivation for the cellular singularity, if I can take liberty to venture this coinage, or the primordial soup of cells to behave in these ways. Rather, the explanatory matrix remains within the complex intertwining and interdependent cellular powerhouse themselves, right? So I want to move on to how the Jains might view things. So what I'm suggesting, drawing from the Jain perspective, is that there is a supervenous relation such that the principle that drives the sentience is not entirely dependent, reducible to, or identified with a biological modular process. But without the latter, the manifestation and functional modulation of sentience could be thwarted or compromised. So there is a two-way relationship, bipartisan, if you like, or what is it called, bilateral. As with the discrete physical entities in quantum mechanics that change through quantum jumps, invisible to human observation, microbodies are in a state of constant pariyaya, becomings from Bimal Matilal, or transformational modularity that is recognized in biological science, as Levin had put it. Often attributed to the natural imperative of evolution, which is recognized, the Jains have a different explanation for the same. Something like the sentient principle. Host has asked you to start your video. Okay, I'll start my video. I have my videos going. You can see the video, right? Yeah. All right. I mean, you can see the slides, right? Okay. Of something like sentience principle, so the Jains have a different explanation for the same thing. Something like the sentient principle having an torque, movement, trajectory and responsibility, which I would like to dub as teleopathy, not telepathy, but teleopathy from telos. There is a call to responsive purpose that always seeks to move the species beyond the station, as it were, finding itself in a sort of spiritual evolutionary intentionality, hence extensional involution, if you will. I can explain some of this later, if you like. So the soul that the Jains speak of is precisely doing just that. So it's not the thinking quantity of the soul that proves the existence of the soul, but rather that the soul has a motion, a momentum, and that's something that is felt in every action that we do, in every thought that we have, and so forth. They're all a movement upward. But there can be a problem with dualist accounts of this kind. So if you sort of set up a mind-body dualism here, which with the Jains have, but of a more complex kind, regardless of whether the dualism errs on the side of matter vis-a-vis spirit, or the side of the spirit vis-a-vis matter. As Philip Clayton reminds us, quote, strong forms of dualism, at least those that make mind into a separate substance, remove mental phenomena forever from the realm of scientific inquiry. On the other hand, eliminative materialism explains the mental phenomena by making them nothing other than the underlying physical processes of which they are the product. It also resolves the debate with most of the metaphysical traditions by removing them altogether from the realm of plausible theories, hence the eliminating theories. So we pose the problem. So following the talks, we pose a problem for panpsychism. So panpsychism faces the combination problem. If everything is consciousness, imbued with consciousness, then why aren't rocks and tables also conscious, just like human beings are? Isn't phenomenal consciousness particular to certain kinds of things, such as sentient creatures? So there is a gradational binding problem here. How can micro-conscious states account for macro-conscious states, such as human consciousness? If micro-conscious states combine or bind together in some way with other micro-conscious states or non-conscious states, then macro-conscious states would yield higher level of intelligence in scale of gradation. They can sum up together. 1 + 2 + 3 = 7. Biology seems to suggest this. NB, the preferred model is not chemistry, but biology. As a cousin of mine who was a microbiologist and virologist convinced me of this truth. So now I wish to examine the Jain how Jain metaphysics might just provide a different model that cuts through the models we have considered above and provides, albeit a guarded solution to the problem of combination in decombination and binding we've noted in the above accounts and the problems raised therein. So Jainism can be understood in both senses, top down and bottom up. So slide 9, this was slide 8, right? Yeah, so slide, sorry. So there is a slide 8, which itself certain changes. It doesn't remain constant, and that goes because of the conditions around it. So it can go modification, it can be attached to material elements. That's how karma arises. It's different in each individual. It is a doer, and namely it has vitality and as a source of action, and is also the direct enjoyer of bliss and so forth. Okay, so now so let us treat of the bottom up first. We could refer to life monads as being microscopic. The coinage micropsychic had not been made when Ninian Smart wrote this in 1968, so I would substitute it here. This is what Smart says rather perspicuously. Quote, despite the sharp divide which is made in Jainism between life monads and non-living matter, the souls are conceived in a somewhat materialistic manner. So it's interesting that he would suggest that it's conceived in a materialistic manner. And that's what slide 8 actually shows, that some of the things that are going on, physical objects are capable of doing that too. And in fact, that's probably what physical objects mostly do. But suggesting that souls are probably also doing that. They expand and contract to fill the bodies with which they are clothed. an image used in this connection is that of light, which a volume, a light source. Using this imagery, I'd like to suggest that it's the body that is in consciousness rather than consciousness is in the body. So I would like to promote this particular conceptualization as it would subvert the centuries of false Cartesian rhetorical question. Where is the mind located? Though I confess the question about the nature of the interaction between the two disparate substances, consciousness carrying life monad and the body remains a problem as much for the Jains. But because souls are interacting almost in a materialistic sense, as Smart puts it, that obviates this particular problem. So moving to the next slide. Where is it gone? All right. So moving on, furthermore, life monads have an intrinsic direction of motion, namely upwards. Karma, of course, can be downward as well and can be sideways too. Karma is therefore thought of as a weighing down agency. Once therefore life monads clinging to karma has been annihilated, it will rise automatically to the summit of the cosmos. To the summit of the cosmos. And it's very important. That will bring me to my next part, which will be the panentheism part. So without needing to posit a transcendental singular deity, Jains achieve a pantheistic cosmology by proposing a unitary omniplane of enlightened consciousness. Functionally, though not structurally, this is their panentheistic deity. A further safety net that's built into this theology is that Jainism will never stop to any kind of rigid monotheism, which is why I believe Jains, when they understand the proper contours of panentheism, would be happy to embrace panentheism as a better model for their life monad cosmology. So this is more of the bottom-up cosmology, if you like. What exactly is a soul, a life monad, and a deep down, and how far deep does it go down? Does everything in the universe have a soul, distinct and unique to itself? Now, this is a problem that can arise for the Jains. And here are the responses. Potentially, a human soul may be called a celestial soul if it occupied a celestial body in a past life or likely to occupy. And that's why the term Bhagwan is used as a designation for the enlightened ones. And certain human beings believed to have achieved highest jina state have attained pretty high state in the past lives, dwelt in the heavens and so forth. Okay, so that's why there would be visually called God or gods. Cognition is the essential quality of the soul that all souls possess. Nothing else knows itself as itself, only the soul does. Socrates even had doubts about that. Hume rejected it, of course. But if we take some analogy from Descartes, the Jains are not too far off from there, but it's not in the thinking, or not just in the thinking. So, so does everything have a soul? This is one question. Now, is it bottom down, all the way down, or just to the macro physical? Well, this is the response, which I take from Christopher Chappell, who answered this question in private communication. He said, regarding soul, these topics are hotly debated in the Jain community. I would answer on the side of a thick jiva. Yes, a rock has a soul. A drop of rain has soul. The Nigoda only version would, as you put it, as me put it correctly, would be too thin, no more than a patina. So the Nigoda means that it's a kind of a lifeless soul, a soul, but it only has some certain purpose and movement and so forth, but does not have some of the sentient principles. But Christopher Chappell wants to say that even there, where we place Nigoda, a very slimy kind of non-conscious bearing life monad, he says even there, now the Jains will agree that souls exist because of the function, because of the way the cells seem to be behaving, with the intelligence that we pointed out from biology. However, there are atom-like entities.
5 minutes left.
All right, I see. Okay, so all right. Okay, so what I might just do is I might just show from the slides what I wanted to argue. So I've now argued the panpsychic the panpsychic The next thing that I wanted to argue was the panentheistic position, how the panpsychism of Jainism interacts with the panentheism. And I'll just show you through the slide. So this is the picture of the Jain world. The Jain world is a very big cosmos, almost a sort of not a person, but more like a model in physics actually than anything else. And here the top world, here's the middle world where we are, and here are the lower worlds where all the other things are. Now, the interaction that's going on here is a bit like the way it's depicted in sort of modern physics as well, that there are two worlds and there is interaction going on, information flowing from one to the other. And this model extends beyond our cosmos as well. So there can be other cosmoses around there which have tons of intelligent things in them, tons of intelligence, and there's information being followed through. So if this world, for example, collapses and disappears, the information from this world could recreate this world here, and vice versa. So that's why the worlds are eternal, and they arise, they're preserved, they disintegrate, and they disappear. And so eventually you'd get this kind of a picture of the cosmos here in the Jain view, which is sort of very telling, very interesting picture. So you have your life monads here, right down to the sort of very cellular levels, if you like, through the macro physics, and it just goes on, it doesn't stop. So it's like a spiraling out with other spheres, and here they call them gods, but these are actually enlightened beings more than anything else. And the causal things here are more vibrational. This is why you don't see straight lines any longer or real circle, but it's more vibrational, more resonance based, as in wave theories that we have, in very high levels of quantum thinking, which we don't actually see a straight causal relation between things. So this is a sort of complex vibrational universe that the Jains have set up, which, as I show, is combination of both panpsychism and panentheism. Panentheism understood very much in the Jain sense. And the last two slides that I would say, this is really the picture of panentheism that the Jains have. The liberated beings are the ones that form the macro, not macro, but rather the cosmos. They're macro in the sense that they were human beings and have traces of individuality and so on. But together with the half moon that you see here, form what would be equivalent to the divine in Ramanuja, or the equivalent of God in some theistic sense, but not entirely in that sense, because the world hasn't disappeared. Everything is as it is, and a very happy arrangement. So if I have 2 minutes, I will read out. I will just read out my conclusion, and I think that we can leave it at that for the discussion to follow. Okay, it's not far. It's the strange. Okay, so maybe we could. I thought I had many more pages left after that, but okay, all right, okay. I think I can stop here, Anand. It's fine. Yeah.
All right. Let me take questions. Okay, if you would like to ask Dr. Bilimoria a question, please use the raised hand function in the reactions element at the bottom of the thing, and then I'll just take the first person in the queue starting at the top of the screen. So does anybody want to go? Okay, Ricardo, let's go.
Okay, I go first. Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, Purushottama, for the class. Thank you very much. So I have a question about panentheism, because in the abstract of your lecture, you mentioned the controversy that there is about defining from a general point of view panentheism. And if I understood your paper,
you're cutting out. Can you write your?
Sorry, can you hear me? Sorry, what did you say? Oh, you want me to write my question? Okay, can't I speak it loud? It would be
Yeah.
okay.
Sound is fine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So my question is, can we have, I mean, a kind of more detailed definition, or should we stick to the kind of general definition that says that pantheism is the claim that the word is in God, but God is more than the word. So this kind of etymological definition is enough. That's what I understood from your paper published in the Journal of World Philosophies. So this etymological definition that panentheism is the claim that God, the word is in God, but God is more than that. Is this enough?
You know, you cut out so much that
Really? I'm sorry.
I don't think I have followed your question fully. You guys in Brazil seem to have some internet issue. Can you write? Is it possible for you to write?
Okay. You can give the floor to the next person, Anand. I will write down my question.
I am writing down the question. Purushottama, can you see it?
Yeah, yes. Okay, good. Right. So I think you mean panentheism, not pan.
Yeah.
I didn't even mention pantheism. I'm not talking about pantheism. Like Spinoza. So right, panentheism. That's the part I didn't fully get to. But so the panentheism. No, I think I did when I discussed Ramanuja. Right. So the panentheism is the view that, you know, if it were pantheism. So let's take the counterfactual here. So if it's pantheism, then the world circumscribes the limits of God, right? So the end of God is the end of the world, if you like, right? And if the world collapses, then God or the divine collapses with it as well. So that's sort of pantheism. You can see that in Spinoza as well. Spinoza did not want any kind of suggestion of a monotheistic God outside of the natural world that we have. And so, you know, you infuse the natural world with divine properties and so on. And, you know, you get a kind of a Hudsonian world as well, right? And that was it. So it's kind of the natural world divinized, right? Or the divine being naturalized. That's probably more Spinozian model, where you have the divine is naturalized and Hudson is the natural world is divinized. Okay, so that's pantheism. But panentheism sort of suggests that yes, we take pantheism as the starting model. There is more to the divine than the limits of the world. In fact, the boundary goes. I wonder if I can get the particular slide that I had, but I may not be able to. So you have the concentric circle, and so the inner circle is the world, and the outer circle is the divine, right? So the world is entire there's a supervenial relation between the divine properties in the world and the divine properties that God already possesses, which is its essence, right? And the body of God is nothing other than the world itself. So the world becomes the body of God, and within that body are all the macrophysical things, including ourselves, or the micro. So then we get down to sort of panpsychism, where everything is God's body. So if it is the case, everything is God's body, then the consciousness or whatever divine properties that God has in Vedanta is Satchitananda, as you know, being, consciousness, and bliss, has to be by definition, there has to be within each of the fragmented parts of God's body, you know, whether it's micro or macro, right? And so everything is consciousness from that point of view. small c, but it bears a relation with the uppercase C, consciousness, namely chit. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Okay. Well, let's move on. Let's move on to the next question, then we can circle back. So Shivananda.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciated it. My question is, in the view of Ramanuja, would you say Ramanuja views what ontological category would you say Ramanuja views consciousness in? Would he say it's sort of like you mentioned it's the essence of the soul, but would you say it's a property, or would you say it's part of the substance, or would you say it's a power or relation of some sort? How would you categorize consciousness in ontological terms?
Well, I'm not really a committed Ramanujan. I only brought that in just for sort of definitional purpose. My real purpose was to get on with Jain stuff. I'm really more interested in the Jain, in the Jain thing. But I think I could take from what I know of at least Advaita Vedanta and Vedanta in general, that consciousness is more likely so that is all there is. There is just consciousness and being and bliss are one and the same thing. There isn't a Brahman that's outside of that. I think we need to. That is the Uttishta, the first definition as Shankara had. Brahman. So Brahman is not an object or whatever, anything like a person, a supreme person, which then has the properties of consciousness, bliss, and so forth. No, there is ultimately only consciousness. And so Abhinav Gupta is very clear about that in his form of non-dualism, that's all there is. It's just consciousness. And because there is consciousness, it has being. I mean, I could conceive of consciousness without being, but it doesn't really matter. So consciousness is all there is. So the question that you ask is it's kind of, there's a categorical mistake there, because you're assuming that there are two things going on, Brahman and consciousness. But I wanted to get to Jane, if there are questions on that.
Krishna, Kshetra?
Yes, thank you, Purushottamji, for your
There's another hand up there.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Can we have your video up? Because all right. Okay, go ahead, please. Right.
Yes, I'm interested in this notion of Jainism solving the problem of combination and decombination, both. And I'm wondering if the Jain notion of perfection, a characteristic of which, as I understand, is omniscience, whatever that means, is an attempt to solve both problems. I don't think he heard my question.
Purushottama, did you hear the question? I think he's frozen, actually.
Yeah, it looks like it. There he is again. Oh, he's moving to another room.
Yeah.
Shall I? Whoops. Migration.
I just typed in your question, at least a version of it, in case. What happened to him? Where did he go?
He's moving around his house.
There you go, Purushottama. Can you hear better? Unmute yourself. You're muted. You're muted, Purushottama. Oh, man, this guy.
Unmute.
Unmute.
Right. So I had to move around because the internet.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can the notion of perfection in Jainism be used to solve the combination problem or decombination problem?
No, I want to correct that. It's perfection, a characteristic of perfection, as I understand in Jainism, is omniscience.
Yes, that's
so
right.
Are they taking omniscience? Is that
Yeah.
addressing this problem from both sides? That's my question.
Right. No, this is the part that I didn't get to. So I want to claim that ultimately there really is only omniscience in Jainism, right? So all the omnisciences, you take them together, they would be like qualia, like forming qualia of a of perfection, if you like, right? And if you take all of them together and combine them, then you get a panentheism out of that, right? That is all there is to the Jain panentheism. So it doesn't solve the decombination problem, but it does solve the combination problem. So combination problem in the sense that you have all these disparate omnisciences, but you see, one omniscience cannot be different in quality from the other one, nor in quantity, because everything that one omniscient being knows would be exactly the same as the other omniscient being, right? There'd be nothing, they're like supercomputers that have exactly the same kind of information, and they're integrated by virtue of the information they have, right? They share. I can't see them being separate. I see them as more as planes interacting with each other. It's a bit like, some of the Cubist paintings that we have. So planes running through each other, but there is still an identity. There is still a differentiation between one being by virtue of the being, by virtue of the life the person had led prior to becoming omniscient. So there's like a trace. It's, so it's my our colleague once, Kevin Hart, described it as trespass of the trace. So I said, no, they're not trespassing. They're actually passing through with their traces across each other. There's nothing trespassing here at all. Of course, a trespass was used from a Judeo-Christian position, but I think that it's much more. So that will solve for me the combination problem. The decombination problem, as far as the Jains are concerned, is already solved because all beings have a soul, and the souls are different and separate from each other. Qualitatively, they are the same, but quantitatively, they're already different. So we don't need to worry about a decombination problem.
Yeah, Purushottama, real quickly, just on this point, I just want to follow up on what Krishna Swami was asking about. I think when you want to present just forget about the decombination problem, because that doesn't really show up in the Jain sort of picture. And also, it's really weird when you're talking about this to talk about both problems at once, because typically what people are doing is they're saying, I've accepted one kind of metaphysics and now I face one kind of problem. I'm going to try and solve it. So I think just stick with the combination problem, because that one suits maybe the metaphysics that's underlying what's going on in Jainism. But I think the way to really help get the traction on your view is you should probably address it to Sam Coleman's version of the argument. So Sam Coleman has a version of the argument called the real combination problem. So he tries to distinguish different versions coming from William James forward, where people have tried to articulate what exactly is the problem with combining. And so William James had a famous thing where he talks about the combination problem, and Ite Shahani has written on what is the real interpretation of William James. So I think the Jain answer that you're giving, it'll be better suited, at least, I mean, when I'm thinking like how a person who works on this stuff might interact with the Jain perspective. I think if you target Sam Coleman and Luke Roloffs, that's a really good way to get the Jain answer off the ground. And I think I hear kind of what you're going for, but I just wanted to point out that typically the problem isn't really presented in terms of knowledge acquisition and knowledge and omniscience. The problem is typically presented in terms of perspectives of independent agents being able to combine to form a new perspective where the original perspectives are preserved. So the problem sometimes is given in the framework of saying that what's going on is that certain, like if you make a watch each of the individual parts of the watch are still there. You can see all the individual parts of the watch working together. They combine together to make the watch work. But in the combination problem, what Sam Coleman argues is that when two perspectives merge together, they form a single perspective where the identity of the original perspectives are lost, because the logic of perspective in combination is such that you lose the point of the direction of the perspective. So unlike the case of the clock, where you can still see the gears independently there and pull one out, you can't do that with the perspective. So knowledge, I see where you're going. I think what you're trying to say is because all knowers know the same thing, because there's only one set of knowledge, there can't be differences of a certain kind. I definitely get the logical trick you're going for with Jainism, but I think by articulating carefully what Sam Coleman thinks the problem is, and then giving the Jain response by switching it to another thing, there'll be more traction. That's kind of what I hear on the Jain side. I definitely see. I don't think you should talk about the decombination problem at the same time as a combination problem. I think the decombination problem is not relevant to the Jain issue at all, because Jainism, if anything, it sounds like it's more like Leibnizian monadology, if anything. And so the type of panpsychism in Leibniz is just kind of different. And so the other thing I would say here that you shouldn't downplay, this is something I think you have that's really powerful in the paper, is one of the things I discovered about Jainism that is a connection to Ramanuja, which is not a connection to any of the other traditions in Indian philosophy, seems to be that they're both concerned with preserving knowledge, growth, and decay, right? So Ramanuja's motivation is to talk about the growth and decay of knowledge of souls over time, right? And the Jains are also concerned with omniscience. It's not very common to see every tradition of Indian philosophy go in for the point about knowledge being important, but both the Jains and Ramanuja go in for that, and Shankaracharya does not go in for that, actually. So I think you do have a parallel. If you want to talk about Ramanuja in your paper, I think there is one that's very clearly important. It's the connection that they focus on knowledge and the importance of knowledge over time. And so that could be like a linking thing. But in general, I would just say, if you want to make the Jainism stuff stick on the stuff about the combination problem, just focus on like Sam Coleman's presentation in his paper called The Real Combination Problem. Thank you.
All right. Well, there's a joint paper on it. That's wonderful. So on the first one itself. Now, I mean, what I wrote is what I could formally think through, but what I'm thinking about and what I'm thinking through. And just yesterday, we actually were, after I finished this paper, I had a class on the Jain perspectivism, Sayadvada, Nanvada, Anekantavada, and it was all about perspectives. It's all about maybe, maybe not, and so forth. So it's a perspectival, the entire thing. And as I was driving home, I was thinking exactly how can I integrate that into the combination problem, which I presented just now with the omniscient beings and so on, right? So my response is that yes, it's knowledge, but it's the knowledge already embeds perspectives. The Jains would not separate perspectives from knowledge. The knowledge is about the perspectives that one has, not so much the perspective of relativity and so forth, because I think they've got over the issue of relativity by the time they've reached the state of omniscience, right? That's what the whole purpose of omniscience is. Hi, Kevin. The internet isn't very good there, so I'm sitting here doing it. So the omniscience issue. So I think we need to unpack what omniscience would mean. Is omniscience just about knowledge of facts and so forth, or is it also about, I mean, the author you cite, do they mean you can have sort of perspective in the way I see a piece of a painting and I'm seeing it from this perspective and that perspective, but I don't actually have any knowledge of what was going on in Van Gogh's head? I think I would need both. I would need, if I'm a historian of art, I would want to know the context where Van Gogh painted that wonderful picture of the shoes, the pair of shoes in the farm, in the soil pair of shoes with the toe part cut off and so forth. So I would want to know why is there a difference being made between perspective and knowledge? Why could we not have that included in the knowledge states. I mean, it's a knowing state more than knowledge state. I
mean, you're correct to think that you can make a connection between knowledge and perspective. I don't think that that's a problem. I think the reason why they stick with the word perspective has to do with the history of the combination problem coming from William James. So I think what they're doing is they're just saying, this is what they were talking about. The general distinction is very clear, though. I mean, knowledge is factive and perspectives aren't factive, right?
Right.
Just because I see something from a given perspective doesn't mean the content of what I see is true. And just because and when I know something from a given perspective, what I know is true in some sense, even if it's just perspectival. So it's the factivity that makes perspective different from knowledge. But also the reason why the combination problem is articulated in terms of something very basic is because what it's really about in terms of how Sam Coleman presents it, it's about how you can add perspectives together. So that example of the watch I gave you is very good because what it shows is that when the watch parts are all together, each individual watch part is still there. It doesn't disappear. And the problem in the combination problem is that when two perspectives merge to form a single perspective, a macro conscious state from two micro conscious states, what happens is the identity of each perspective is lost in a unified field. That's the idea. So I can send you a diagram. There's a very famous diagram that's used to present it, but that might help you understand the difference.
Yeah, I think, yes, I think we would want to take that into account. You're right. You're quite right about that. It doesn't have to be effective. Right, but I would think that might apply much more at the macro psychic level as well. But I'm not sure that exactly how it would apply in the omniscient, in the multiple omniscient states that you have. I mean, why would they be messing around with perspectives? Not effective. They don't have the time to go around art galleries and so on. They're not looking at the world as though it's a big art gallery with a lot of paintings. I mean, they want to help people to get on, with lives and the direction that they need to take because of the burden of karma. But they're not very active either. I mean, they don't actually interfere. So they kind of passively know what's going on. And so, one could say, yeah, they have huge amount of perspectives there, but they sort of leave it at that. Some might be moved to intervene, some might not, depending on what connections they had with beings in the past lives.
Do you want to have another question, Shivananda? Do you want to? Hey, one more question from Shivananda.
Yes, please, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Just a really trivial question, just for my own understanding. If we understand souls to be sort of eternal fundamental entities, can we avoid the whole decombination issue altogether? Because can we say that they don't need to combine from something more basic, or they don't need to decompose from something more basic? They are in themselves basic, and therefore we avoid the problem. Is that allowed in this debate, or is that something? Am I not seeing an alternative version of the problem that will manifest at that stage?
Right. So when Anand said that you don't have to have the decombination problem is not there, it's partly because yes, by definition the genes have already decombined, if you like, decomposed the souls, because there isn't one grand soul as in Ramanuja, which you then need to cut up. It's already all cut up. But the combination soul was, well, then what happens? How do you combine that into something, quantitative or qualitative, which would then represent my panentheism, which would represent the divine, if you like. And I said that it's the combination of the omnisciences, right? It's a combination of the souls, which cannot happen at this level, not at the phenomenal level, not at the empirical level. Your and my soul are not going to combine here. But when we attain omniscience, the qualia of omniscience, because they are qualitatively one and the same, there is a de facto, de jure combination, if you like. It's not a factual combination, but it is a virtual combination.
Yeah, but okay, but I think the difference between what Shivananda is asking and what you're saying is pretty clear. And the answer that I would give is just the following: is that you guys are talking about two different things, actually. So Shivananda is correct. I mean, if the Jains already have souls at the bottom, then there is no combination problem, because the whole point of the combination problem is to explain how micro conscious entities, which are not souls, can combine together to form macro conscious entities, which may or may not have souls in their macro conscious states. That's what the problem is about. But the thing is, you're not running, Purushottama, the classical combination problem. You're running a version of the combination problem that goes from individual souls to panentheism.
Right.
So you're not running the same level. So Shivananda's question is right. In the original problem that's going on, the one that people are concerned about, which is explaining the hard problem of consciousness by talking about panpsychism, the combination problem arises precisely because people are saying that macro entities have conscious states just like macro entities like ourselves, but when they combine together, that's how you make a macro phenomenal state, like the one you and I are having now. It comes from micro phenomenal states of individual things. But those micro things need not have souls, and also macro conscious states need not have souls. And if souls, like Shivananda was saying, have the property of consciousness or the power of consciousness as a phenomenal feature and an intentional feature, then there really isn't much of a problem at that. They're not explaining that thing. So Purushottama, you're kind of explaining the next level up. You're saying once we have souls on the thing, there's a combination problem about how these souls get together and make panentheism true, I think is what you're going for. And so then there's another type of combination problem. But the fundamental aspect of the combination problem has to do with the joining of perspectives. So it could be the case that, as I was saying, that the problem just re-arises. Maybe we should take Ricardo's question now. Ricardo?
Okay,
Ricardo?
thank you. So since Purushottama has fixed his internet issue, I think that I can ask my question again. Can you hear me, Purushottama?
Yeah, I can now hear you better because it was my
Wonderful.
internet problem. Yeah, and
Wonderful. So my concern is about the definition of panentheism. So that we know that there is a big issue about whether or not we can offer a good definition so that it distinguishes pantheism from pantheism and from theism and so on and so forth. And I'd love to hear Anand about that also. And in a paper of yours, you seem, if understood you well, you seem to defend that the etymological definition of pantheism, as they claim that while the word is divine, there is more than the deity. Than the word. It seemed to me that to you this etymological definition is enough. So each model would be in charge of explaining what the in means in the definition. So I'd like to hear from you if I'm right and in the way that I understood you, and also whether this whole definition issue, it really matters. I think it does matter, but I'd like to hear from you. And also, if you'd like to elaborate a bit more, perhaps you and Anand, how we could understand this in the definition of panentheism, in Jainism and perhaps in Ramanuja also. And if you can have a definition that goes beyond analogies, because you know that the body so analogy of Ramanuja, but I was wondering, for instance, if in Ramanuja we have a more precise characterization of the way the word is in God.
All right, well, I think we've gone over this already. So, right, it's definitional. I mean, you know, one thing is pretty clear that I want to separate, distinguish rather, panentheism from pantheism, right? So the kinds of because pantheism can still operate within a very naturalistic framework. But I think what the Jains would want to say, and what Ramanuja certainly would want to say, is that that kind of reduction that Spinoza attempted is not not applicable in the corpus of Vedanta texts and so forth that he comes from. So he would want to have something more than panentheism. And what better model you have? I mean, we can only talk of models. I'm not quite sure that we have any other access to what was going on in the minds of the people who wrote the great Brahma Sutras and the Upanishads and so on. So you just expand the circle, expand the circle beyond the naturalistic to supranaturalist, if you like, rather than supernaturalist, and you have another circle outside of that, and that will encompass the divine for Ramanuja, certainly, and show the relationship that it has with the world. So that is, yes, it is definitional, and we are trying to explain the N in the Panentheism, right? It's more about the N than about the theism part, especially when it comes to Jainism. So for Ramanuja, the N-theism is important, no doubt about that, because Brahman is not, it's not to be reduced back to some kind of naturalist phenomenon. Now, but I'm really more concerned about Jain than I'm about Ramanuja. I mean, I think Anand speaks very well for Ramanuja here. So I'm trying to sort of look at what is the N in the Jain, and what would amount to Panentheism. They've never talked about this. It's never been spoken, because they say we don't have a God, we don't have a monotheistic conception, and so forth. But I don't think that you need that. I think I'm trying to draw that, if you like, the divine writ large. Although through the states of omniscience, right? The state of omniscience itself, which is not a property and attribute of a being like Brahman, but these are properties of souls. Each soul, they say, is divine in that sense. So it's a realization of that, the culmination of that, perfection of that state is what omniscience ultimately amounts to. So it's like all the knowledge in the books that you have behind you in the bookshelf, all pulled together, and that knowledge, if you like, is the penent part, penent part of it. So I'm trying to broaden, because you see, all pantheism and panentheism, they've come from Western traditions, and people are stuck with it. So if you take if you take our friend, some of our friend Mulin or Gorke, they think that these are all sort of compatible with theism. Well, I don't think that Jain panentheism is compatible with theism at all, because there is no theism in Jainism. There is, you don't end up with a theistic thing at the end of it, not at all. And the omniscience, and that's why I'm working from a source of consciousness and knowledge. And if you take Anand perspectives, then we can argue about how perspective is related to knowledge and so forth. But what is not related to, that's the counterfactual that I want to throw out here, is theism, is any kind of suggestive theism, and that's the important part. Just as we've done with panpsychism, we've sort of taken it back out again from its the more naturalized versions that we have, despite all the problems that we might still have, combination, decombination, and so on. At least definitionally, we can say that we want to expand this and see other possibilities that might be there. So then I combine panpsychism and panentheism in Jainism, and I get panenpsychism. So this is a new, a new term that I want to float, a new concept that I want to float, which I think may combine both panpsychism and panentheism in a very interesting way, which has not been thought about before. And Jainism has all the outlines of it. It's just the details that have to be worked out. And this is the very first attempt at which I'm trying to do that. So that's what I was getting at, and I wanted to say something a bit more about, yes, the combination problem that Anand had also raised by Shivananda. Well, that's where I'm struggling with it from the Nigoda, from the very basic 2-cell, 3-cell, and so forth. But if the Jains say that everything is a soul, and therefore everything has a property of consciousness, vitality, and motion, right? Then what is the combination problem? It's just, it's the emergentist problem more than anything else. So I would like to see that they solve it by emergentism, then the actual, then the issue of combination sort of goes away. So from more simple entities, you get more complex entities because of the exponential combination of those things. And so from micro, you get the macro, because the micro is already imbued with the very qualia, the properties that you're going to have in a more complex form in the macro. So this is one response to Ricardo and a response to Anand.
Yeah, so good. I mean, I definitely understand what you're trying to do. I don't think everyone is going to see the problem the same way until you give out the answer to the question, whose consciousness are you trying to explain as a problem via the combination problem? So when we initially articulate the combination problem, we say something like, I want to explain how Anand has phenomenal consciousness. And the best way to do that is to say that consciousness exists in the microparticles in his body, but they combine in some way to make macro-conscious states that Anand has. But the question is, there's a combination problem for explaining Anand's macro-conscious states from his micro-conscious entities in his body, let's say. But we get the combination problem out when we answer the question, whose consciousness are we trying to explain? Now you're separating it by levels, so you're not running the basic one, you're running something about some higher being. So is it God's consciousness?
No. I'm running from the very basic, the Nigoda, the two cell amoeba.
Yeah.
Right through to Anand, right? So my last response was only to that, because you brought down the combination problem to the combination problem from the micro to the macro, or the macro to the.
Yeah, but it's not. But you can't do it in terms of cellular biology, Purushottama. It's not about cellular biology. It's about fundamental particles. So it's not like you're made out of a bunch of parasites that all are conscious and they're joining together. We're talking about fundamental particles having a property called panpsychism, or consciousness of some kind. That's what Sam Coleman and Dave are talking about. So it's a little bit different. I think what you're seeing here, I think maybe what we need to work out is this. There is a structural analogy between the problem that they're talking about called the combination problem and the problem that you want to talk about. But maybe the structure is making you think it's the same problem when in fact it might be different in subtle ways. And that's what Shivananda might be pointing out. I mean, clearly it does seem to me like if souls already have consciousness, then you don't really need to explain macro consciousness from those little, because it's not like multiple souls in my body are getting together in Jainism to form Anand's consciousness. It's just Anand has a soul and he's conscious. So yeah, I mean, you do have to figure out something about that. But in general, I would think that, when you want to solve things about the combination problem, the way people are talking about it, they seem to be more concerned with the issue of what happens when two perspectives combine. And so in Jainism, you're right, you do have all this logic of perspectives and things like that. But again, the logic of perspectives there is not the same notion of perspective. The notion of perspective here is the boring one that actually you first started out with going to the art gallery. It's the one that's just like, I have a vector field closing in on a point in space. The vector goes out this way, right? And so basically, if you have that vector and someone standing next to me has this vector, when you merge them together, how do you preserve those individual vectors in the thing? You don't, because mathematically, you just have a new point in one field. That's what they're talking about, at least Sam Coleman. So it's a bit more boring in that sense than what you're talking about. But I do think, there's something here. It's just, you got to figure out where the details line up in the right way. Are there any other questions? We're at time. We're at like 9:20 right now. Sorry.
Was Ricardo happy with my response?
What? I think it's fine. I mean, I think it's fine.
No, Ricardo.
Ricardo, yeah, Ricardo. What? You want to say something?
Well, perhaps I'd say that answering my question is kind of important, because one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was whether or not Panentheism is necessary for panpsychism and vice versa. And unless we have a general definition, I don't see how this question can be answered. So that's why I asked it.
Oh, well, I answered it by saying that, for me, Panentheism, Panentheism entails panpsychism, but some people say that panpsychism does not, entail Panentheism. All I wanted to say was that the form of panpsychism that the Jains have actually gets you to Panentheism, and it's a kind of a safer panentheism without without having the problem of beginning with a divine or a god or something that, as in Ramanuja and so on, which already presupposes, which already prefigures a kind of panentheistic notion. So in a way, if there were no enlightened beings in the world, the Jains would say there is no panentheism. You have panpsychism, but not panentheism. But they do get to panentheism, and I think it's a kind of good smart kind of panentheism, if you like. I want to sell this kind of panentheism, and then Benedict and I and Leicester wouldn't have the arguments that we've been having. if Benedict is listening to us. Anyway, so all right, Anand, I think I have to think a little bit more about the combination problem and so forth. But I think biology is important because biology doesn't sort of start somewhere else. I mean, what are in cellular structures and so forth? There are particles, there are molecules and so on, molecules and what have you. They're talking about molecular structures. It's not as though these are completely unrelated sciences. They are related, as is chemistry with biology and physics. But I suppose you want to say, well, you can't talk about cellular intelligence or cellular level consciousness if there isn't consciousness in the particles that form the cellular. Is that what you and
well, no, the main point is this: we should, first of all, I wouldn't be talking about intelligence at all. I think it's a confusion to talk about intelligence and consciousness in the same breath. It's a big mistake. But I think when you're talking about the phenomenal consciousness, there's nothing wrong with talking about biological systems and cellular relations. All of that stuff seems relevant. I'm just saying, look, first of all, at least from what I've studied, it seems to me like some people who are micropsychists, like Galen Strawson, don't even take the combination problem seriously. They don't think what Sam Coleman is talking about makes any sense. Just because David Chalmers wrote a paper called, the combination problem, doesn't mean that everyone who's a micropsychist thinks it's a problem. So Galen Strawson just, seriously just says, I don't see any problem. I don't know what you're talking about at all. And, other people like Sean Smith also are like, no, I don't see the problem here. Luke Roloffs wrote a big book explaining how to solve it in the micropsychist thing. So it really is different. I think what you're looking for is a kind of a structural problem that has to do with going from something smaller to something bigger, right?
Yeah.
That's
okay. Yeah. All right. So I shouldn't worry about panpsychism at all then. That's just the definitional thing in Jainism, right? We're beginning with already granted. So this is a given in Jainism. The panpsychism is given, and then how do we get panentheism that's going to differentiate from theistic panentheism? There's no there is no nuance of theism here at all, which Ramanuja will walk away from this for sure. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Shankara, I think, would probably be a little more open to it because he wasn't committed to a theistic notion at all. I mean, I think if anything, he was more committed to Buddhist shunyata, emptiness, but he wanted to preserve knowledge. There's no doubt about that. I mean, he's the greatest protagonist of knowledge in the tradition. There's no doubt about that at all. And so, I think he would be one with Jains on that. He did argue against the Jains for sure. Yeah, but that's because I don't think he understood the complexity. But the state that he wanted to achieve, I don't see that being any different to the state that the Jains want to achieve, the omniscient state.
Are there any other questions from anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. All right, I think we're Ricardo. I think
it's a good crowd of people. I mean, I'm very surprised that people are not tearing me apart.
I have a lot of questions, but I already spoke too much. And it seems that Purushottama, it's time for your class now, right?
Sorry?
it's time for your lecture. You have a class in a few minutes.
Yeah, I've kind of, I've got my TA to take care of it. It's fine, yeah. So I do have to go soon, but I don't have to rush right away, yeah. But I'm happy to take another question or comment or whatever from people if they have. I mean, I know, Jainism is not a tradition that's very widely known in philosophy of religion, but we are now working to bring Jainism more into philosophy, cross-cultural philosophy of religion. So I wonder, and I'm asking the audience, is this a good exercise or a waste of time?
No, I think actually Jainism has a lot of stuff to offer, these debates in metaphysics and logic and epistemology and in philosophy of mind. So no, I don't think it's a waste of time. I think it's complicated because in order to really drive out how to fit these things across the traditions is difficult, because you have to think about these structural analogies where there's differences about what's really being talked about. But I don't think it's a wasted exercise. But it could be more clearly sort of articulated by focusing on the large moving parts, like what are we trying to explain? What is the problem in explaining it? What do we get out of explaining it? Stuff like that might help. And also maybe with the term you're trying to float, what was it?
Panentheism.
Panentheism or
something? No, just Psychism with pan-n added to it.
Oh, Panentheism.
Right.
Yeah, I think it might be good to just break down that term early on and just say exactly what you mean by it, and then reverse engineer why you're positing it, so people can be like, oh, that's what he's going for, and that's what it means, and now he's going to give us the argument for why we need that. And yeah, I don't think it's a bad exercise at all. No.
Right. So yes, no, I thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So, because we are logic and religion and not just philosophy of religion, the logic part is the philosophy of mind. So that's why I chose Panpsychism, and the religion part is Panentheism.
Right.
But you see, it's actually almost reversing it. So Panentheism is becoming more logical here, and Panpsychism is becoming more religious here. So
Yeah.
I'm doing a post-colonial thing. I'm subverting the terms that we've taken for granted in the subdisciplines that we've been working in. The Panentheism is a preserve of, after Chalmers and the friend you cite and Galen and so forth, that it's just part of philosophy of mind. Well, it never was previously philosophy of mind, just within philosophy of mind. And Panentheism has sort of become already entirely within the compass of philosophy of religion. Well, Jains don't see it that way. They see that as both of philosophy of mind, but also epistemology. I mean, there's the whole epistemological. So I can build something up from epistemology, and get to Panentheism, right? Okay. So those are the kind of cross-disciplinary things that I'm trying to, sub-disciplinary things that I'm trying to do. I'm not going to history or anthropology or something, but within the branches of philosophy itself. Okay. All right.
Cool. Good. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, perhaps I have, if I'm allowed, one more question. Of course, I understand that you are speaking that from the perspective of comparative philosophy, and perhaps more than anything from the perspective of Indian philosophy. And of course, you are right by doing that. But I was wondering, because of course we are in the West, and we know that this very hot debate on consciousness and so on. So I was just wondering, what arguments would you give us to accept or to see your view as a reasonable view or plausible view in terms of the Western debate on consciousness?
Right. Well, okay. So I think well, there were some some gestures towards the arguments that I made. So I was really, in a way, laying out the ground in the field that I want to plow, and I see a number of directions that came from the questions and discussions we had, Anand and Shiva and yourself and so on. So I need to I need to brush up the arguments. So I don't have them fully yet. I'm going to have to rework this entire thing. So I may actually begin with my hypothesis. I'll begin with Panentheism and say, this is what I want to establish, and these are the components of that. These are my premises, and I will demonstrate through that. But it's also very difficult. I mean, as you say, we're in the West, and so for the terms that we're using are so Western with their own load, including consciousness. I mean, the Jains don't have that understanding of consciousness, and I think Anand might be suggesting that, or may not be, but I take the term. For Jains, knowledge is a lot of perspectives. That's really what it is. So, that's why we have Syadvada. That's why we have Anekantavada. We have perspectives all the time. That's what our knowledge is. And none of them is perfect until we get to a position of omniscience, and then our perspectives turn into true knowledge. Then it's the true perspective. But until then, we're just left with Shabdabhangi, we're left with Anekantavada, with Nanvada and so forth. So I want to be able to take the perspectival positions, if you like, or that definition of consciousness, a function of consciousness. So consciousness is just a function here. That's all it is for Jains, because it's a property of the soul. Well, we could even leave out the soul and say, well, let's just talk completely in terms of the epistemes that are floating about. So we're just all bundles of epistemes. The question is, the real challenge is, can we attribute that to the smallest, the minutest of particles at subatomic level and so on? If we can't, then we have a combination problem. I completely agree. But I didn't want to start there, which is why I thought we would start with intelligence, so we start with molecular level, but I don't think that we shouldn't, that's a mistake. Okay, well then I'd have to start somewhere else where perspectives begin, right? I have to find that Archimedean point, and I don't know, I have to go back to Jain text and so forth and have a look at it again to see. But I know for sure that as far as the Jains are concerned, one sense beings and two sense beings actually have sentience. So what does it mean when they say that these things have sentience? Does it mean what the utilitarians are saying nowadays, that they feel pain? Well, is that all it is? It's sort of a reflex cognitive, conative rather than even cognitive, response. Or do they mean that this is a capacity to actually process information and set up a goal and go towards that goal? Okay, so the Jains only use the word sentience. That's what jiva actually means, or life monad. I will have to go back and see where exactly does sentience begin the task of processing information so that there is knowledge, or at least a perspective on things. And then I want to combine them, find a way of combining them to what we are, the macro-psychic beings. And then the combination of macro-psychic to a higher order beings, which is omniscience, right? So there's a lot of work to be done on this, but I think it's a project, and we're having a conference in Des Moines in next week in Drake University to actually discuss some of these issues. So it's really just a very very if you like, a nuptial project. It's has only started.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, well, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you for all being present, and I hope you've all taken something away from this, and send me back some feedbacks. I would love to. I would love to develop this, and as you can see, Anand and I are going to have a lot of conversation about this.
We'll talk soon. All right. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Just speak over some nice beer.
Thank you very much. I'd like just to thank Purushottama and for the wonderful presentation. Thank you, Anand, for chairing the session, for the contributions. And before everyone leaves, Assis, he has an announcement to make.
Thanks, Ricardo. Thanks everyone again for your participation. We had a wonderful conversation with Professor Purushottama. So I just want to announce our next webinar, which will take place April 14. It will be over the topic of theist and atheist arguments in Indian philosophy. So it will be, the speaker will be Professor Mishra from the Banaras Hindu University in India. So he will be talking about theist and atheist arguments from the perspective of India philosophy of religion. So thank you again. I hope to see all of you over again next semester, next month. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate that. Jai Janendra. Jai Janendra.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Take care.
Jai Janendra. Haribol.